I never heard this before.
Oh my gosh.
I never heard that you by lifting heavy weights, you're increasing your brain connectivity.
Yeah.
I know exercise is good for your brain
Yeah.
in general, but this particular piece is new to me.
In some of the research that came out even last month, that if you're doing heavier load lifting, which is that power range where you're doing heavy loads, 80% of what you think you can do, 5 or 6 reps, then it stimulates neural conductivity improvement in the prefrontal cortex, which is, primarily driving cognition. And then you have other changes in other parts of the brain that help. But all of this helps attenuate or slow dementia and Alzheimer's risks. So if we're looking
slow down. What you're basically saying is that by lifting heavy weights for women, it slows down Alzheimer's risk.
Yes. Part of the problem is we have brain metabolism change. So we know that glucose is not as effective as brain fuel. As, insulin resistance comes up, glucose isn't as available for other systems of the body. And we want to increase neural plasticity. So that means how our neurons are forming and firing and talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if we create a new motor pattern or we need a stimulus to recruit more muscle fibers, that's that neural conductivity. And that's what you get at the very low end in heavy strength training. It's a neural conductivity. And that's the important factor in the resistance training concept. I'm not telling people who've never done resistance training to immediately start on that end. Any resistance training is great.
You don't want to start with 100-pound weights.
No, because they looked at heavy lifting versus moderate intensity, which is your body weight and your lighter loads and longer rep ranges, so your 10 to 15s. And it was only the heavy end that affected prefrontal cortex. The moderate weight and the higher reps affected other areas of the brain, which is great. It's a good improvement, right? Because you're still affecting neural connectivity. Mm-hmm. But for the concern of cognition, we need that prefrontal cortex increased connectivity and functionality. So when we're looking at what are we doing to optimize health, that's one of the first things I say.
But is there any understanding of the timing of this? In other words, if you start like when you're 40, obviously it's better, but can you start as late as 60?
Yep.
And is it going to achieve the same benefits?
We don't know how robust it is, but that randomized controlled trial was looking at people who were 60 plus.
I'm asking for a friend because I didn't start strength training until I was 59. So
You're good. You're excellent. You're protecting your brain. We're all going to be having Zimmer frame races, not because of our brain and our bodies, because of our joints. So it doesn't matter when you start. We say start when you can. It's never too late to start. Mm-hmm. And we're having more and more research come out in 70, 80-year-old individuals that are showing the heavier rep range, which is relative to what you can lift, improves not only bone and lean mass, but also brain health.
That's amazing.
It's like the one thing that everyone should be doing. And I come from a massive endurance cardio background. And I've always had strength training as the undercurrent, right?
Yeah.
But now all the research is just pointing to how important it is in today's society where we don't move that much, that we have to do the push-pull motions and put our bodies under load. Not necessarily cardiovascular load, but actual load.
Yeah, I'm on the video version of this podcast. I'm going to give my team my picture because I was like a runner. I was running like 5 miles a day from 14 until like 55 or 6, right? And I was riding my bike 100 miles a day or 40 miles or 30 miles. And I was lean, but I wasn't strength training. And then I started when I was 59. And then I had a comparison picture of me at 42 maybe and at 62. And it's like, you can't believe it.
Night and
it's
day,
like,
right?
Yeah. And I never would have thought that was possible. Yeah. But, it's never too late.
No, it's never too late. I mean, I was full endurance too. I ran 19 marathons before I was 20. I did Ironman, I did Xterra, I did bike racing, and I had strength training on the undercurrent, but I didn't let people know I was doing it because it wasn't appropriate for a woman.
I just wasn't doing it. I was telling myself lies. Like, I'm doing yoga. That's like strength training.
Yeah, I've heard that too. But you probably see this too. We get DEXAs and it's women that look healthy because they look lean and they're runners and stuff. Yeah. But you get the DEXA and they have a high amount of visceral fat.
Yeah.
Compared to what they should be. And their bone density is relatively low. And they're like, I don't understand. I eat clean, I run, I do all this stuff. It's like you're not strength training and you're not eating enough. Because if you're not eating enough, then you're not supplying your body with the fuel that it needs to rebuild. So it's tapping into bone, of course, because that's part of the aging, but also the stress of exercise without enough fuel. And that higher visceral fat is because there's a change in our lipids in a conversation between the liver and the fatty acids that are circulating that esterifies them to then be stored as visceral fat.
Yeah.
So we can fix that.
So basically what you're saying is, women who look lean are what we call skinny fat.
Yeah.
Or we used to call it tofu, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And you can tell that by doing a special kind of very, very low radiation X-ray called the DEXA scan that measures bone density for osteoporosis, but also measures fat in your body and muscle and the distribution, right? Because a lot of these scales, you can't really tell the distribution, these bioimpedance scales, and you can kind of get a rough sense, but like your arms and legs could be like, 10, 15%, but your belly could be 30%.
Right.
And that's not good.
No.
And you may look thin.
Right.
And that actually leads to some of the same cardiometabolic risks of heart attack and diabetes and stroke as being overweight.
Right.
You're under lean and over fat.
Exactly. And I often give an example because I'll get women who come in and we get the DEXA, we get their bloods, and their LDL has suddenly shot up and they've never had problems with cholesterol before.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, that's a dysfunction of estrogen because estrogen kind of helps with cholesterol and risk factors. And when you start losing that, if you are not eating enough and you're not doing exercise stress to help the body understand what's going on, then you're going to have this increased negative lipid profile, as well as poor bones, not really fantastic muscle quality, and we see this increase in visceral fat.
So let's sort of dig in on two bits of this. One is the food, and one is the exercise.
Yeah,
because those are independent variables that we have control over. Right? We can't control our genes, we can't control our parents, we can't control our height, our age, but these are things we can control. So on the exercise front, is there a difference in what women should be doing when they're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60? And if so, what is it? And can you unpack that for us? And what's the right mix of cardio, HIIT training, or interval training and strength training, and what kind of strength training? Because I'm hearing there's like body weight, there's lightweight, there's heavy weights. So can you kind of help us really unpack all that?
So when we're in our 20s and early 30s, pretty lucky. Our reproductive years, we can kind of get away with everything. I really impress women when they're in their 20s and 30s to pick up strength training. And it doesn't matter what rep range you're doing, just as long as you are doing strength training and have an eye to being muscle-centric. And you can do variations of high intensity, low intensity. Your body recovers really well because we have the benefit of our sex hormones. Women also have the benefit of having more endurant fibers. So we already have a robust amount of mitochondria, and we have more proteins for mitochondria respiration, better antioxidation responses, and these are inherent sex differences. This doesn't matter if you have estrogen and progesterone or not. So we're already really endurant. We need to work on our fast twitch. We need to do a little bit of intensity and strength training. When you start to get into your...
So you can get away with a lot.
Yeah, you can.
This is the bottom line in your 20s, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's why you're like, all the high rocks people are like in their mid to late 20s. You're like, yeah, when I was back in my 20s, I probably could pick that up too, but now not so much. But when you start to get into your late 30s and start having more anovulatory cycles, which means that you aren't producing as much progesterone because you're not ovulating, and you have a change in your estrogen-progesterone ratios, this is when we start to see a little bit of dysfunction in how you're training.
And just so people understand this, so when you're a guy, you make sperm your whole life. When you're a woman, you're born with a certain number of eggs, and it starts declining from the day you're born until you go through menopause. And as you go through 30s and 40s, you start to have less eggs, and you may not ovulate every cycle, which means you have estrogen but not progesterone.
Correct. And when we start seeing more and more of those anovulatory cycles, people don't necessarily know that they're anovulatory because they'll still have a bleed. And this is why when
you might bleed heavier.
Right.
You might have heavier bleeding because progesterone stabilizes the uterus, and then when you have just estrogen without the progesterone, you get like clots and heavy bleeding and more cramps and all that.
Right.
And that's what happens is when we get in their 30s, 40s,
right. And they're like, what's going on? So when we talk about like...
And then they get anemic.
Yeah, and then they get anemic. So they'll talk about like menstrual cycle phase-based training. It's like, well, no, let's take that off the table because that's one of the conversations. You train according to your menstrual cycle phase.
And you're saying that's not a thing?
We can't say that because, one, there's not enough robust evidence for a whole human to be able to do that. Is too generalizable because we don't know when someone ovulates. Every woman's cycle is variations of when they ovulate. So it's more, we know you roughly have X amount of days in your cycle. See how you feel, and you can tweak your training accordingly. Because if you know on day 23 you always feel really shitty, then you're not going to go do a hard session. So when you have reproductive years, that's what you do. So when you start getting into your mid to late 30s and you start seeing these inherent changes, it's kind of an awareness factor of, oh, what's going on? So people start to feel a little bit less strong. They start to feel a little bit less like themselves, and they're starting to go, what's going, like, am I not training right? And unfortunately, with the diet culture, most people say, oh, I need to increase my training and decrease my food because I'm starting to put on belly fat or I'm not responding as well. So they start to really kind of get into more of a low energy state. See this all the time, especially in recreational female athletes. And when we get into a low energy state, that means that we don't have enough food coming in to support daily life as well as support training. So then we get a compounding variable of now they're going to put on more body fat and have more issues sleeping and definitely not recover well. So it becomes a negative feedback system.
Yeah.
And that becomes the worry. So then when they get into their 40s and really start to have issues, that plus the sympathetic drive of perimenopause causes a complexity of issues that then they go to their physician, and the physician is like, okay, maybe it's because you're in this period of your life where you're highly stressed, you're not taking care of yourself. Do you exercise? Yeah, I exercise. Keep doing it. But they don't realize that the exercise that they're doing isn't appropriate for their bodies when it's going through this phase.
So what should they be doing in that phase?
Yeah. So when we look from a sex difference, not a sex hormone standpoint, women are already super, super endurant by the nature of being XX. So the long, slow zone 2 stuff is not something they need to do all the time. We need to now find an external stress that's going to create a signal in the body that's going to cause responses the same as estrogen, progesterone used to do. So what I mean by that is we need to have really super high intensity work and resistance training because we want to signal to the body with high intensity work that we can use glucose effectively.
Kind of like sprinting and like that's what they call high intensity interval training.
Yeah. Because it causes what we call epigenetic change. So we know that it's a lock and key. So high intensity work is the key to unlock the cells, to open them up, to allow glucose to come in without insulin. So it's a GLUT4 protein that translocates, opens up, and we see that insulin isn't needed for glucose to come in.
I just want to stop you there because this is such an important point you're talking about, and most people don't understand it. People think that in order to get your blood sugar or glucose into your cells, you need insulin. But the muscle is a unique tissue and can actually absorb glucose without insulin, right?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Especially in the post-exercise state, because now
and that's right. And the way you get that is by having healthy, good muscle.
Right, exactly, right. So, I mean, one of the things that diabetics do is like a 10-minute walk after a meal because it helps stabilize blood glucose. And that's what you can do when you do high intensity. You get a permanent change in the muscle to have the ability to have more GLUT4 proteins translocate to improve insulin sensitivity, because now you have other ways of getting glucose in without so much reliance on insulin. So it makes the body more sensitive to the insulin.
So it's a double benefit. You get insulin independent uptake of sugar or glucose in your muscles, and you don't have to make as much insulin in order to drive the glucose into the cells. And when you don't have to make as much insulin, that's a good thing because insulin is a fat storage hormone and makes you store belly fat, which you were talking about.
Right.
If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.